The race is on, and it's official. Cadillac has announced Sergio Perez and Valtteri Bottas will race for its new Formula One team in 2026, both on multi-year deals. But why has it gone for experience over youth? And what does it tell us about the ambitions and priorities of this project? I'm Edd Straw, and joining me to tell all is Jon Noble. Well, Jon, let's get straight into it. Where do you fall in this debate? Some people hail the pragmatism and think it's a great deal for them to get Perez and Bottas. Others think it's a little bit dull. Where do you stand?
Yeah, there is a romanticism to when people talked about a new team coming into Formula One. It was viewed as this is a great opportunity for 2 extra seats. This can go to youngsters. We've got some great talent coming through. People like Alex Dunn, for example. Great season in Formula 2. This would be a perfect berth for him. What a great way to start your F1 career with a new team and push forwards. But I think Cadillac have taken the pragmatic approach. They've used their head. And I think they understand that the challenge of Formula One, this isn't the time to bring a youngster in and develop him and push him forwards. This is about getting a team who hasn't raced in Formula One, with a lot of people who've not been in Formula One, with a car that's new to Formula One, in an era with new Formula One rules, new cars, new engines, everything. It's not the time to have new drivers. It's a time to go for experience. It's a time to go for speed. I think it's been I spoke to Dan Towriss, the CEO of the Cadillac team. He said it's been a tough decision to make, but it's what they have to do if they want to get serious, if they want to push this project forwards. And this is about laying foundations for the future, and a future that 3-4 years time down the road we can get the youngsters in. But right now it needs all the help it can get to get pushed forwards and become respectable.
Yeah, and this thing of experience is invaluable. It's not just experience in the car, it's experience off track as well, because this is all being built up from scratch. There's no pre-existing stuff. So all the systems, the knowledge, there's endless intangible elements where you need the drivers to be able to bring that knowledge. And you've basically got a driver from Mercedes and a driver from Red Bull who bring knowledge of how the two teams that have basically dominated Formula One for a big part of the last 15 years into your team. And that sort of thing is invaluable. I mean, the experience numbers are staggering. I was totaling up 527 F1 starts, 16 wins, 23 poles, 3,435 points, 26 seasons in F1 between them. 70 years combined age. They're both 35 at the moment, perhaps the less encouraging stat. But what have they said about their decision-making process? It does seem that experience was just the thing that they kept stressing.
I think experience was there, but I think what they also were especially keen on was that they had 2 drivers who were bought into the project. So this isn't a case of let's find the most experienced drivers out there, entice them back to Formula One with big paychecks, and go through the process. They wanted drivers who were hungry. They wanted drivers who could perform. They wanted drivers who are willing to give them the feedback. And I think it says a lot as well. Dan Towriss talked about doubts they had, skepticism they had about potentially both drivers. Skepticism on Checo's side in terms of what happened in 2024, the collapse of his form against Max Verstappen. They had doubts about this. They went to speak to Red Bull to try to kind of get an understanding of this. They put this to Checo himself. They, gave him a test. They wanted answers. They wanted to understand, was there a tangible problem here, or were there factors that those outside couldn't see? And they say Checo came through this, with flying colours, passed the test, gave them the answers they wanted, showed his commitment, showed his desire, showed he was hungry, explained what happened. And same with Valtteri as well. They looked at his performance. His last season with Sauber wasn't great. Very difficult season. They did analysis of qualifying times and race times, dug into it. But I think the conclusion is there are 2 experienced drivers there, both hungry, both committed, both willing to push this project forward. Because I think what Cadillac need above all else is every single day, those drivers at the factory, those drivers are in the car, they're giving them guidance, they're giving advice. You need to do this. This is how we do things. This is what we need for Formula One. That's what that project needs in this early phase.
Yeah, and just that communication and feeding into it. Because, for example, if you take the classic model, like let's say you wanted an experienced hand and then a hotshot rookie, if you can find the right hotshot rookie, well, this team hasn't got the time or the resources to be educating a rookie driver at this stage, and it would be remiss to try and do it, I think, because it needs the drivers to make a positive contribution, because they've made a lot of progress there, but there's still so much to do, so much to build, that experience is absolutely worth its weight in gold, which I know is quite dull. There will be people listening thinking this is really, really boring, but it's the reality, isn't it? When you're actually building a team and making these decisions, and you're responsible for whether they work or not, you have to look at the reality on the ground, not just the as you refer to, the romanticism or the excitement of having a younger driver or new drivers in. Actually, these old hands who've been around for a long time and who both, for differing reasons, are clearly motivated to be racing an F1 still, because they could have just disappeared. It's not a particularly appealing thing on paper to drive for a team like Cadillac next year that's going to be off the back of the pack everybody's expecting. So there's a lot of factors there that, in the cold light of day, make an enormous amount of sense.
Yeah, when you look at the Audi team, for example, it's officially entering Formula One. It's his works team next year. It's got Nico Hülkenberg, vastly experienced driver, Gabriele Bortoleto, a rookie this season. But it's coming off the back of a Sauber team that's been in Formula One since 1993, decades of experience. It's had the highs, it's had the lows, it's been through manufacturer experience. There's a lot of work's gone into that project to build it forward. That's about a team stepping forwards, making a step up to works operation and evolving. Cadillac started from scratch. It hasn't done 1 mile with a Formula One car yet. Every mile it gets, be it in testing, be it in practice, qualifying, races, is going to be hugely valuable to it. So having two, it's a safe pair of hands, and safe pairs of hands, of course, is boring. We want these exciting youngsters coming in and showing stuff. But I also think for a youngster, if they came in, it would probably be hugely frustrating, because Cadillac is starting from so far back. So you need drivers who buy into that time, are ready to bide their time, ready to push it forwards, ready to know the scale of progress that's coming forwards. So, all logic dictates this was the most sensible decision that Cadillac could have.
Now, there will be people listening thinking, particularly in the case of Sergio Perez, I think, we'll have commercial backing, etc. Is this a financial decision? It's understandable why people go there, but I think they've kind of characterised all that side of things and the appeal in Mexico, in that part of the world, for Perez, and also the commercial appeal of a Bottas as well, who obviously has a big profile. They're all sort of fringe benefits. They're peripheral to the central decision, aren't they? And I think we can believe them on that.
Yeah, this isn't. I mean, there are benefits. I think both Valtteri and Sergio come with commercial partners, but this is part of Formula One. Every driver on the grid has backers who've pushed them through in their career. They've got supporters. So I don't think you can separate this out as 100%. But I think, as you said, fringe benefits. So for GM, this is great having Sergio Perez. Mexico is a huge market for General Motors, for Cadillac. So there'll be benefits from that. We know Sergio's got sponsors. Valtteri's got sponsors as well, and built up a big following over his many years of Formula One. But I don't think for 1 second that they've gone down a list of drivers, said, right, these are the lists that will have the bigger sponsors. Let's pick them. I think Sergio, it's an element in the decision, but I think it's far down the priority. The priority was the experience, buying into the project and having the speed that they need.
I think the one thing I would say is I suspect in an absolutely ideal world, they'd have wanted sort of one of the older mega experienced ones, say one of these two, and kind of what I call a medium experienced driver, but there's not many of those around. Graham Loudon's talked about the fact they're actually a bit out of sync with the driver market, and even if they weren't out of sync with the driver market and people being available, not in the middle of deals, Cadillac wouldn't be your first choice if you had a large number of options. I think it's fair to say. So you could say that would have been a slightly better way to go, because then you get the best of both worlds, someone who is still a little bit younger but has a lot of experience. But there aren't really those drivers clearly available at this stage, at least not at the level with the kind of CVs you want. So we've got to remember as well, they were very, very limited in terms of the drivers they could choose from.
Yeah, and it's a unique situation, 2026, because everyone's almost biding time a little bit into next season. Nobody knows who's going to be quick. Nobody knows who's going to be slow. Nobody knows what the best seat's going to be for 27. And I think all the manoeuvring and machinations going on behind the scenes are all about people positioning themselves for 27. And this is why Loudon says they're slightly out of sync with everybody, because they wanted people for 26 at a time when nobody really wants to move for 26. And one of the downsides of getting anyone from the current grid is a reality about where Cadillac are going to be and where they're coming from. They can't sell a current driver the prospect of being in the midfield. They can't sell them the prospect of podiums or wins. This is very much a start from absolute scratch. Let's get on the grid. Let's achieve respectability to start with and push on through there. And it may take 2 years, may take 3 years before they're fighting properly in the midfield. I don't think we should underestimate just how difficult a challenge this is going to be. So I think when you dig into it in terms of all the options they had for drivers, what they need at this stage, they've probably done as good as they could have got.
Yeah, very much so. And I've probably got the advantage, certainly over our listeners, of the fact I've been around the Silverstone facility a few months ago. You may have heard our podcast where we talked a bit about that. And they've done a lot of work. They've built up a lot, but they're still a Formula One team that's in development. And they're still going to be a Formula One team that's building up when they start racing next year as well. So it's not like it's all going to be ready by the time they get to January. So there's vast amounts to be done. And that's why the experience of these guys is so important. Well, let's look at this from the other perspective now, John. We haven't heard much yet from Sergio Perez and Valtteri Bottas. I think we will hear a bit more from them in due course. But why do you think they've committed to this? Because the other way of looking at it is they're both vastly experienced drivers. They've been driving for top teams. They're used to winning. They know that Cadillac's not going to be winning races and championships on a timeline that works for them in terms of their race. So why have they committed to this, do you think, rather than, say, holding out for Alpine? Because much as we might mock the Alpine situation, the Alpine Mercedes package next year will be more competitive than the Cadillac. So in the short term, that would give better results.
I think there's two factors at play here. One is driving for a team that definitely wants you and is ready to give you the long-term commitment that you want. For all the positives that Flavio Briatore could tell about Alpine, that it's getting Mercedes engines next year, it's a well-established team. It could be fighting midfield, fighting for podiums, could be up there. It's also a team that hasn't had much kind of consistency. There's all the management moving around, the doubts about where it's going, it's up and down form. So it's not a place you go to guaranteed a long-term future and commitment. Whereas I think what Cadillac's willing to give both Valtteri and Sergio is they want both drivers. They're ready to commit long-term to both drivers. And I think they're honest and offered a realism about where they're coming from. And it's a chance to be part of a new project. I think all of us in our life need a Northern Star, need to push something forward with lots of common ambitions. And I think while Sergio and Valtteri would probably both admit they'd much rather be diving into a team that's guaranteed to win races next year, equally racing for a manufacturer team, having the chance to push a project forwards, be excited by it, is probably enough to think that this is a good place to be. Because the other option is Sergio Perez doesn't race again in Formula One because there aren't many other options. And Valtteri Bottas just does another year as Mercedes reserve with potentially nothing at the end of it. So I think it suits both drivers and the team very, very well.
Yeah, and it could mean a long-term relationship with the Cadillac brand, with General Motors for them. So they might have half an eye on other racing opportunities beyond Formula One. Obviously, Cadillac's racing in sports cars, for example. General Motors has various programs around the place. It's never a bad thing to be associated with a manufacturer like that. And I do think it's interesting, those two, because I do think they've both got a desire to keep going in Formula One, not just through habit, as sometimes you think happens. I don't think they're just looking for another payday necessarily. I think there is motivation. I mean, Bottas signalled that in his way because he said, right, I'm going to stay around. I'm going to take a reserve role. I'm not above being a reserve for a team that I raced for and won races for in the past. So he's done that. You often see him at races. Perez has stayed away, but I think there is a determination given the way things ended for Sergio Perez with being paid off by Red Bull. I do think he's still got that desire to come back in and prove them wrong, if you like. And so he's still got a shelf life in Formula One. And we've got to remember, Perez is a driver with a very good F1 CV outside of Red Bull, and actually did achieve quite a lot with Red Bull as well, even though ultimately he struggled and they got rid of him. So interesting psychologies from those two drivers. But knowing what I know of them, especially Bottas, who's shown, certainly with when he moved to Sauber, that he very much likes that idea of being a guy who's building up the team and working with that kind of organisation, etc. That's a recent example. He's definitely got that desire in them. So I think people who think that they're just there to cash a check for a few years, I think are misjudging those two.
Yeah, there's another element too as well. I've often found this in Formula One, that drivers who kind of have a year out through their own choice or the choices made for them often learned a lot about themselves in that season out. They realise what they liked about Formula One, what they didn't like for Formula One. Some of them decide that I'll just go and do something else. I'm happy to go race in sports cars, or I'll go to IndyCar and the F1 doors shut forever. But there are others who regain that kind of drive and determination and willingness to push on forwards and realise that what Formula One means to them. And actually they come back in a different frame of mind, more willing to take some of the negative aspects of the jobs, like competitive frustrations, willing to take it more on the chin than they were before, because they see the bigger picture. And I think both of them, this is why it works so well for them. It's not like they've both had bad seasons in Formula One and this is last chance saloon. They've got no other options to stay on the grid and they've been forced to take a Cadillac drive because it's all that's left. Both of them could have walked away and done something else. Both of them could have waited for seats to fall out elsewhere for 2027. But they've both felt that this is the right place for them to be. They've both shown the team that they're determined to give what it takes. They're buying into the project. They're willing to take the disappointments that are going to come, because it's going to be a big challenge. But they can see there is a project to get their teeth into. And I think it's a good fit. And they're at a very good stage in their career, actually, for having had this year out and this kind of the reality check that comes from sitting on the sidelines and just better understanding the sport. Because when you're a young driver coming through, I think you get so absorbed by everything, kind of you get spat out the other end, don't actually realise what F1 means to you in your life. Whereas I think these two are now coming back in a different frame of mind.
Yeah, a sense of perspective is never a bad thing to have for any of us, is it? And I imagine if we apply it to our own lives, I think people would be interested if they could have a year out and then go back into their career. That would give them a different perspective, and they'd probably quite enjoy the break. But yeah, I mean, it's going to be difficult because by the time you get 6 races into a season, let's say you're qualifying 5 seconds off the pace, you're not racing anyone else other than your teammate. The reality of that is probably going to be tougher than even they can imagine at this stage, because they'll understand it's going to be that. But that's a long, hard season for that sort of thing. So it will be a test for them. There will be people who say, well, are they drivers who've got the speed and the edge still? We know Bottas is a brilliant qualifier, slightly less good racer, but still has turned in some very good race drives. Perez is kind of the inverse, isn't it? So I guess also in that regard, it's quite a good skill set they've covered across those two drivers, which is what you want as well, because it's good to have drivers who cover each other's weaknesses, if you like. So it's actually quite balanced in that regard, even if the age profile isn't where you'd absolutely have it if you were having a kind of normal driver selection process.
Yeah, and I think there's also an aspect that personality-wise, they aren't the two that are going to lead to an explosion within the team. That I think they both are drivers at the stage in their life and their careers where they can see the greater gains going to come from both of them pushing the team forwards. They'll get better results if they're working together to help the team make the improvements, dial out those early problems, make gains, back at the factory, in the garage, out on track, and then worry about the competitive instinct, rather than coming in on day one thinking, I'm going to show the team that I'm better than Checo or I'm better than Valtteri, and cause problems on that front. So I think that the dynamics work well from that perspective, because you've got two drivers who've got that nice combination of being fiercely competitive, but not so much that they're kind of ruthlessly nasty people who are going to stitch up the other driver for their own self-gain.
Yeah, and these are all things that go on the list when it comes down to sifting through everyone. One thing I will say is the team has been very, very rigorous in terms of going through all the candidates. Graham Loudon's have had conversations with all sorts of the contenders, right down to those who haven't even raced an F1, people like Paul Aaron, who's an Alpine reserve I've spoken to. So they've been very methodical in going through all of the available options. So loads of drivers have been linked to those seats because they have been spoken to, because why wouldn't you do your due diligence as a team boss? And I think that's the thing when you go through a process like this and you have to look at it kind of not with the romanticism, with a just cold light of day, who's going to do the job we need, then that's an obvious answer. And I guess the main question is, at what point do they then look to transition to kind of a next generation driver? We know these are multi-year deals. They've not made it entirely clear exactly what the terms are, et cetera, and when the change could be. But they'll have to have half an eye on what driver they will have in the future, and that there was a reference that was made to having kind of a pathway for developing American talent. I think German Cadillac would like an American driver, but it's not an essential, is it?
No, the team's got to get established first. I think it's at a stage in its life, obviously having never done a race yet, where drivers aren't its priority. What it needs is an organisation that works. It needs operational personnel who can get the job done at the track, who can execute strategy, who can get things run properly, car that can perform properly in the midfield and push forwards. Until all those are in place, drivers aren't really a priority for them. And I think the timeline probably works well. You talk multi-year. Multi-year in these days probably means 2+1 or 2+2 or however you want to do it. So by the time you come out of 26, 27, we'll know what direction Cadillac's going in. We'll know if it's making the progress needed. And as soon as it gets, in that midfield fight, if the gaps are as close as they are this season, where a tenth, 2 tenths is making a big difference, that's the time you start focusing. Well, do we now need the superstar young talent in just to push things on a bit forward, just to put one of these two under a bit more pressure to deliver? But they're not at that stage at the moment. They're probably at the stage now where they're going to come in and just be looking to build off from the back of the grid and push forwards, and you'll be finding chunks of time early on. It's not at the stage where they're going to be getting down to the final hundredth of a second like teams at the front of the grid are.
Absolutely, and heavily leaning on the data bank and the know-how of those two drivers. Well, let's just move off the drivers now, because they have talked about a little bit more about what's going on at Cadillac, haven't they? Including addressing those rumours that were going around about Christian Horner. So what can you tell us about that?
Yeah, it's been obviously the summer rumour mill is always an interesting one, because lots of stories appear, and obviously there's been a lot of intrigue over Christian Horner. What's he going to do after Red Bull? I think there's no doubt he is going to come back at some point in Formula One. We don't know where yet. We know Ferrari's recently committed to Fred Vasseur, so that door's shut, and Christian was never really that interested in it. It had that meeting with John Elkann back in 2022. They discussed it. He turned it down at the time, so it wasn't really an option for him. He's been linked to Alpine, which could be a possibility. He's been linked to Aston Martin, more recently linked to Cadillac coming in. But it didn't seem particularly logical place for him, because I think Christian's belief is always that he needs to be somewhere where he's in total control of the project. So this means running the chassis side, running the engine side, running the team side, the global operation. Doesn't want influence from outside. You get on and you make the key decisions yourself, and you build a racing team in his mind. It was this push which turned Red Bull Austria against him in the end, because they didn't like Red Bull Racing becoming effectively Christian Horner Racing. So when he does his next step, it's going to be very much in this control environment. Cadillac, could that be him? Potentially, but Dan Towriss, their CEO today, completely ruled out, said there's been no discussions at all about Christian, 100% committed to team principal Graham Loudon, so we can forget the Christian Horner talk for now.
Yeah, this was not a non-denial denial, as we might call it. It was just an absolute flat-out denial, and there's nothing to suggest, because I do agree with you. He's going to want to be able to A, run the show, and B, I'm sure Christian Horner will want a proper stake in the team that he gets involved with next. He's not just going to be there as an employee or an appointment, is it? It's going to be something a little bit different. So I don't think that makes sense to Cadillac right now. They talked a little bit about Colton Herta briefly as well, didn't they? Because he'd obviously been linked with the seat, but it's pretty clear that there's no interest in moving him away from IndyCar. Of course, he drives for Andretti in IndyCar, which is also TWG.
Yeah, first of all, denied a story that had gone around about Herta potentially being put into Formula 2 next year prior to F1, but it was dismissed by Dan Towriss again. I think they are longer term interested in an American driver, but I think it's finding the right time and the right driver when the team's in the right position to do it. Now it's all about getting those experienced hands of Checo and Valtteri in that car to push them forwards. They don't need a rookie. They don't need a youngster now. This is something further down the road. So I think eventually there will be an American driver in that team if it's successful and pushing forwards, but it's still going to be a few years away. And
there's a little bit of talk about the progress they're making. Obviously, the engine program's still going on. That's for down the line. I think it's 29 that they've kind of registered with the FIA, but that'll probably line up with the new engine formula that's potentially going to come in earlier than was originally planned. So that's in progress. Plus, of course, to talk about the simulator work, that kind of thing, and preparations for testing. Any little tidbits you learned on that side of things?
Yeah, only one interesting. Well, I wasn't sure if this was a slip of the tongue in terms of timings or anything, but Dan Towriss suggested we won't get to see what the new Cadillac car looks like until February next year, which is actually after the first test, because the first test obviously is the end of January. So I wasn't sure if that was a confirmation that this test we've talked about in the past about behind closed doors and nobody knows what's going on, because in theory there's no pictures because teams aren't allowed to take any of their own media personnel in or social media crews or anything like that. So is there a hint that next season's going to be even weirder, that we're not even going to get to see what the 26 cars look like or launch until after they've all run for the first time? So it's even more intrigue about how the start of next year is going to pan out.
Yeah, I think we can be very confident they'll be at that first test. They've been adamant on that. It'd be really worrying if they're not. And when I went around the factory, the design office, you can see the schedule, so you could see when they were signing off the aero package for that test and that kind of thing, and all the schedules and so on and so forth. So there's a lot of work that's been done there in terms of getting into that. So I think they will be running. But yeah, interesting what that was hinting at. And this is going to be really interesting, isn't it? Because Cadillac's performance is going to be a huge talking point during testing. And obviously testing is going to be massively newsy because new cars, what's the competitive order? There's going to be an enormous amount of excitement around that. But this is going to be its own little fascinating subplot, isn't it? Because when it's a new team that's coming together, it's got lots of people with experience and know-how. It's not all novices or anything, but that's the first time we're going to see it gelling and trying to operate as a Formula One team. And it's very, very easy, as we've seen from the past, for little things to trip you up, just things that in established teams you take for granted because they're established processes and bits of technology and so on and so forth. So I think right now, if you could say Cadillac are going to have a smooth testing with a decent amount of mileage, that would be a big success for them. They'd probably sign on the dotted line for that right now.
Yeah, but also I'm still completely intrigued as to what we can expect at the start of 26. I haven't got a clue if, is the front to the back of the grid going to be covered by, say, 2 seconds, or is it going to be spread out to 5 seconds, or are we going to have these gaggle of cars like a group of manufacturers who are in the front of the pack, then there's huge 1-2 second gap in the middle, and then these other teams adrift at the back, and then Cadillac further back? Or have Cadillac actually played this quite smart to come in a year where potentially some of the big guns could get it wrong? Because we talk about all the potential for an outlier and an outsider to get it right and nail it and come through smashing it and surprise McLaren and Ferrari and Red Bull. But equally, there is potential, as we saw at the start of 2014 with those regulations, for some of the big hitters to get things totally wrong. So it is going to be intriguing to see where that entire grid spread lines up at the start of 26. Then where does Cadillac fall into it? Does it fall into a gaggle of teams in a certain position? Is it a drift at the back by a margin, or is it just kind of getting there straight on the back? But I think if they were in Melbourne, if they were on the back of the grid and in with a sniff of the cars ahead of them, I think they would be pretty chuffed with that for a first race.
Oh, that would be absolutely magnificent. I actually think running smoothly but slowly, qualifying relatively comfortably but off the back, that's a job well done for me. And if they get to the level you're talking about, and we don't know because we've got no way of measuring it, that would be kind of borderline miraculous, if you like. I mean, Graham Loudon said it, that if you're going in against a bunch of teams that have been established for so long and have spent so much money building up all that knowledge, you'd be pretty embarrassed if you were being beaten by a startup team. But that's why the Cadillac story is so exciting, actually, and why there's so much interest in the drivers as well, because you don't see startup Formula One teams very often. The last one was Haas, and that was heavily reliant on Ferrari technology, obviously in a way that Cadillac doesn't have a technical partner of that nature. It does have Ferrari engines and gearboxes and so forth, but it's doing more itself. So this is not something that we see very often at all. We haven't seen a team in this kind of era starting up from scratch. So it's a great test of that. And I imagine all of those entities floating around that are talking about trying to become the 12th team will be watching this with interest, won't they?
Yeah, it's also a manufacturer name behind it. When we do Cadillac stories and Cadillac podcasts and Cadillac videos, they're really popular. Manufacturers always generate good interest among the fan base, so there will be a lot of attention on them. And Mark Royce, the CEO of GM, talked today about the lengthy process they went to get this entry across the line, because they got knocked back in the first phase, had to redo everything, eventually got there after 12 months of kind of changing the line of the project and the renaming and the rebranding. He said actually that process made them better. I think they analysed themselves a lot more. They looked at what they were doing, how they were going to approach things, what was needed. So I think this time out, while frustrating for them at the time, has maybe put them in a slightly better position to better grasp the challenges that are ahead, get things more lined up, and get a sense of realism about this huge challenge that lies ahead of them.
Yeah, and I think you can take the signing of the drivers as confirmation that they are realistic. Graham Loudon called it a statement of intent, and it's not a spectacular statement of intent, but it's a good pragmatic, we understand what this challenge is and we're gearing up for it statements of intent. So yeah, some of those listening will be thinking it's very, very dull, and it is dull and conservative and pragmatic, but sometimes that's the way you've got to go. There'll be a time to be bold with driver signing decisions if this project makes the progress that they want to. And that's some years down the line, I think, at this stage. So Bottas, Perez, sometimes dull, but very, very capable is the way to go, because those are two drivers who, they may not be world champions, but they have a lot of ability, and I've got a lot of respect for both of them. We've all seen what they can do in Formula One over the years, even if they've come up short when up against a Lewis Hamilton or a Max Verstappen in the same team, and that would be the case for most drivers. Valtteri Bottas outqualified Lewis Hamilton a third of the time. That tells you something, doesn't it? And there were days when Perez could really cause a bit of a challenge to Verstappen, even though there were lots of others where he was miles behind. So yeah, that's what they've gone for. Going to be a really interesting story to follow. So thanks very much, Jon, for hopping on to tackle this breaking news before heading off to Ord's Zandvoort. Thanks to everyone for listening. So stay with us for everything you need to know from the world of Formula One.